Welcome to another PureRead audiobook. It's wonderful to have you with us. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple and easy way ensures we can continue adding more delightful audiobooks for your listening enjoyment. The following story is copyrighted PureRead Limited, the home of books you can trust. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy.
The Duke's Stolen Bride, Regency Romance by McColl. Chapter 1. Mistaken Identity. Lord Byron Gladstone, the Duke of Leicestershire, prided himself on being a very patient man and one who could put up with anything that life threw at him. But all that had changed that very morning when he woke up to find a hastily scribbled note laying on a platter on his bedside table. "I have realised that I don't love you and so I can't marry you. I'm sure you can find another suitable wife, Lady Tamara Wickham." His lips tightened as he crushed the note in his large hand. Much as he'd been expecting his wayward and flighty betrothed to change her mind, this had come as a shock. Lady Tamara Wickham was one of the most difficult women he'd ever met, but she came from good stock. His grandmother, the Dowager Duchess Lady Mary Gladstone, had insisted on him wooing and then proposing to Tamara because her cousin was the Duke of Nottingham. It was a well-known fact that Lord Abel Wickham was one of the most organised and prosperous dukes of their time, and many sought his counsel. What was whispered among his peers was that he had the regent's ear, and if anyone wanted anything from the ruler, Lord Abel Wickham was the best person to befriend. It wasn't that Tamara was the best he could find, but the connections that her family had made her stand out above her peers. She also had the training necessary for a duchess because for a long time she'd been the hostess at her cousin's manor, and people spoke of her impeccable manners. Byron sort of disagreed with that because he'd experienced a different side of the woman. But he needed a bride, and when his grandmother had pointed him in Tamara's direction, he decided to follow her advice. Tamara had insisted on an engagement while they were in Paris, and he'd obliged her. He'd gone there on the regent's business, and she'd followed him, even though it quite irritated him. He never mixed business with pleasure, and having Tamara in Paris had really tried his patience to the limit. She wanted to go shopping for her trousseau in the fashion houses of Paris and to attend balls every single day, yet the war was on. Napoleon had escaped from Elba, and for 100 days, things had been really strained in Europe. Yet his betrothed didn't seem to consider all that. All she wanted was to have the best engagement and eventually the wedding of the year. For his grandmother's sake, he'd obliged her and catered to her every whim. Now it was just a few days to their wedding, and she'd sent him the note, which he still held in his hands. It made him question his judgment with regards to her being a suitable wife after all. Byron was sure Tamara had bullied some poor servant to deliver the note, and he wouldn't waste time finding out who. The thing was, he was supposed to be getting married in a few days, and his grandmother had made all the necessary arrangements for their wedding. He couldn't imagine her disappointment at having to send out letters to the invited guests, cancelling the wedding. Then there was dealing with the various suppliers, and worse, the shame of being rejected when he was almost at the altar. He could live with it, and if things got too hard, would take refuge in London. It was Lady Mary that he was concerned about, and how she would react to all this, unless there was something else he could do. There was only one thing to do, and that was to attend Lord Abel Wickham's wedding, which was happening that very day, and find Tamara. He was sure she would be there because she loved attention, and her cousin's wedding was being talked of by everyone. Lord Abel was marrying the woman who'd saved his life, and the tale-bearers romanticised the whole thing. Byron was sceptical about this issue of love at first sight, but to each his own. A man had to marry at some point, and if his future cousin-in-law believed himself to be in love with a woman he'd only just met, so be it. Who was he to judge them? In any case, he had problems of his own with his runaway fiancée. Tamara needed sense drummed into her, that an engagement was as good as marriage, and there was no way he was going to allow her to renege on her promise to him. With that in mind, he got up and rang for his valet to prepare his bath. He had a wedding to attend, but most importantly, a wild fiancée to rein in. He could see her circulating among the guests, and his eyes narrowed. Not once had she looked in his direction, and he felt like striding over to her and shaking her. But he had never laid a finger on a woman, finding it quite distasteful and vile. Still, Tamara invoked a lot of emotions within him, but sadly, none of them was love. Marriages of convenience were the norm in society, and he would learn to live with his wife. He was sure that after they had children, Tamara would settle down and realize that she was a mother and a duchess. When she'd ignored him for long enough, he walked over to her. "I need to speak with you," he said in a low voice, and was surprised when she pretended not to recognize him. "I'm sorry, but who are you?" He growled deep, and she frowned. "Stop your childish games this instant. I need to speak with you, and if I have to carry you out of here, so be it." He felt even angrier when another young lady came and pulled Tamara away, ignoring him altogether. What was wrong with this woman? Didn't she know that he could propose to and marry any woman that he so desired? His duchy was stable and prosperous, though not quite like Abel Wickham's. Still, he could hold his own, and nothing was going to stand in the way of his achieving what he'd always wanted. Tamara seemed to be avoiding him and stayed out of his way for most of the evening, but finally he felt that enough was enough. She was flirting with some pups who were still wet behind the ears, and it made him feel slighted. What could she possibly see in those immature boys who were still attached to their mother's apron strings? And how dare she flaunt them before his face, as if he didn't matter at all? He could see the people close by, giving him curious looks as he growled his displeasure. When Tamara moved into the arms of a young man, more like a boy, and seemed to enjoy dancing with him, that was the last straw. Byron didn't care if nobody invited him to their social functions ever again. He was ending all this foolishness now. He strode purposefully towards the couple on the dance floor, uncaring that people were staring at him. "Lord Courtney," he addressed the young man, "I believe this dance is mine," and without ceremony cut into the dance, drawing Tamara away from the young man who was left standing with his mouth wide open in disbelief. That was rather rude. Byron merely growled and danced with his betrothed, moving her slowly towards the edge of the crowd of dancing couples. People moved out of their way, and he was soon leading his protesting bride, to-be, down the hallway and out to the courtyard. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded harshly. "Shut up right now, or so help me." He turned and gave her a look that silenced her. He didn't care that there were servants with lanterns moving around to assist guests who were departing early or receiving late comers. The driveway was lined with all manner of carriages, but he had told Travis his footman to park at a vantage point, ready for a hasty departure if need be. "Where are you taking me?" He didn't respond, but led the young woman towards his carriage, practically lifted her into it, and didn't even wait for her to be properly seated before he gave his footman the command to leave. Chapter 2. Kidnapped Again. Kathleen Crammer stared at the tall, imposing figure seated on the seat opposite her in the carriage with both shock and fear. Either this was all a bad dream, or she was one of the most unfortunate people on earth. How was it that within the space of a few weeks she was being kidnapped again? "Who are you, and where are you taking me?" she demanded, noting that this carriage had only one door and her captor's large form was blocking any chance of escape. "I demand that you get me out of this carriage at once." But the man didn't answer her, and in the darkness of the carriage she couldn't tell whether he was asleep or merely ignoring her. What was going on? When she realized that the man wasn't going to speak with her, she forced herself to settle down and think of a way of escape. At least this time, she hadn't been drugged, but it didn't make her any less frightened. She'd seen the man watching her from across the ballroom as she got to know some of the guests at her uncle's wedding. His eyes had seemed to follow her every move, and she wondered who he was, for she'd never seen him before. Yet he seemed to be there solely for the purpose of making her quite uncomfortable, but she'd refused to let that stop her from having a good time. It was her newly found uncle's wedding, and he was marrying the woman who had not only saved Kate's own life, but his as well. Aunt Tilda was a really wonderful woman, and she was really happy for the two of them. Even in the situation she was in, Kate couldn't help smiling at how things had gone so right for her and her friends. Just a few weeks ago, she'd lost her mother and been on her way to Nottingham to find her uncle, her mother's brother. Her mother had told her about her uncle, who was the Duke of Nottingham, and had been sure that he would take good care of her. She'd gotten into a crowded coach, and by the time they got to London, she realised that someone had snatched her reticule while she was asleep. She had to change coaches at an inn in London, but didn't have money for the next leg of her trip. Frightened and alone, She'd approached a motherly-looking woman for assistance. She did so because the woman had been on the previous coach with her and spoken kindly to her. When she explained her predicament, the woman was all sympathetic and willing to help. "Of course, dearie," the woman had patted her hand gently. "It's not safe for a young one like you to be alone and with no money. Join me in a light snack and I shall pay your fare to Nottingham. In fact, I'll deliver you to your uncle's home myself. Come, we need to partake of something before we embark on the long journey." "Thank you so much, you're so kind." "I help where I can." The woman led her into the inn and called for some mild ale and pie, and Kate munched contentedly, unaware that her drink had been drugged. Her rescuer helped her to the carriage as heavy drowsiness took her, and the next thing she knew when she woke up was that she wasn't anywhere near her uncle's home in Nottingham. Instead, she was hundreds of miles away at an abandoned old docks in Liverpool, huddled together with nearly 40 other girls. Her mother had often warned her about getting into carriages with strangers, but she'd been desperate, and the woman had looked so harmless. It was while speaking with 1 or 2 other girls that she'd learned that the same woman had enticed them, and they ended up at the warehouse. They'd been sold as slaves and were to be shipped to America to be mail-order brides without their consent. Scared out of her mind, Kate had prayed for someone to rescue her, but nothing happened. She'd been in the warehouse for 3 days when their captors arrived and chained them in 2s. She was feverish and throwing up violently, and that had probably saved her from the terrible fate planned for her and the other girls. The men had abandoned her in the warehouse, and she knew she was lucky because 5 girls had died the previous day and been thrown into the sea. 2 had tried to escape but were caught and flogged right in front of the others, no doubt as a warning for anyone else with such an idea. When everyone had gone from the warehouse, Kate tried to crawl out so she could get to safety but didn't get very far. She became unconscious and thought that was the end for her, but when she next woke up, Miss Matilda Johnson and Sephora Oswald were there with her. In the following days, they had helped her find her uncle's place, and even though he'd refused at first to accept that she was his niece, he now treated her like a beloved daughter. Once he found out the truth about her mother being his half-sister, he took on the role of her father, for she'd never known hers. He'd died before she was born. What would they think when the wedding feast was over and she was nowhere to be found? She made another attempt at conversation. "Sir, who are you and what do you want with me?" "Tamara, will you just stop with all this pretense?" The man sounded quite exasperated. "Why are you pretending not to know me?" "That's because I don't," Kate frowned slightly. She'd seen her Aunt Tamara at the manor a few days ago, but then she disappeared again. When she asked Tilda, the older woman merely shrugged as if to say it really wasn't her business. This man must be mistaking her for Tamara because most people who saw her for the first time always did. The resemblance was uncanny, and even she had been shocked to see how identical they looked. The only difference was that her aunt's eyes were hazel while hers were silvery grey. "My name is not Tamara." "Nice try. Now, try and get some sleep because this is going to be a long journey and I'm exhausted. The last thing I want to listen to is idle chatter by a woman who can't be trusted to speak the truth about anything." "Sir, I'm not lying." "Go to sleep now," and she felt something warm tossed onto her lap and realised that he provided a blanket for her to use. "We'll talk better in the light of day and when I can see your face clearly. It's cold and the blanket will keep you warm." Seeing that she wouldn't get anything further out of the irate man, Kate sighed and closed her eyes. At least he didn't seem threatening, and somehow she wasn't frightened of him as she should be. He also seemed like a gentleman, but one who was angry at her aunt. What had Aunt Tamara done now? Byron wasn't asleep, but he didn't want to listen to any more lies by the woman seated opposite him. Why couldn't she just own up to her faults for once and stop trying to pretend that she didn't know him? This time she'd gone too far, and he wasn't going to just allow her to walk all over him. In a day or two, they would be at Gretna Green and married. Then he would begin the process of taming her. It was a very unconventional way of doing things, but he was sure that Lord Abel Wickham would support him on this. No nobleman or otherwise liked to have a relative who brought shame to the family, and by hastily ending their engagement, Tamara Wickham had done just that. If he knew Abel, the man would probably shake his hand and drawl in an amused voice that Tamara was now Byron's problem and no longer his. He sighed inwardly. What was he going to do about this woman? Perhaps his grandmother would be able to help tame her, because Mary Gladstone didn't suffer fools gladly, and no one ever went up against her and succeeded. Yes, indeed, his grandmother was the right person to take care of Tamara and ensure that she behaved like the duchess she was about to become. At some point of the journey, Kate became aware that she was leaning against someone who had his arm around her. She started, but then remembered what had happened. The horses didn't seem to be slugging at all, and she wondered whether they had stopped to change them at all. Just settle down and go back to sleep. In about an hour's time, we'll be at an inn, and you can freshen up. I tried to wake you up 3 times while we changed horses, but you were dead to the world. Kate didn't say a word, wanting to move away from the comfort of the strong arms that held her, but finding that she quite liked it. He wouldn't even let her move away when she tried to. I won't bite you, so stop fidgeting around. My holding you is for your own safety because the road is rough due to the snow and rain. You nearly fell off the seat and I got concerned. Go to sleep, Tamara. She closed her eyes tiredly and soon drifted off again. The next time she opened them, it was early in the morning and the stranger had moved back to his side of the carriage. His eyes were open and he was looking at her in a funny way. There's something so different about you, he murmured. I just can't get my mind to say what it is right now. That's because I'm not who you think I am. Enough, please, Tamara. We're about to arrive in Gretna and all this foolishness will end. What will it take for you to finally own up to your childishness and realise that you're a grown woman? The truth, the truth. What do you know of the truth? He said sardonically, turning to stare out of the window. You wouldn't know the truth if it rose up and smacked you in the face, Tamara. Chapter 3, Truth Revealed. I tell you once again, sir, my name is not Tamara. I am Kathleen Crammer and the niece to Lord Abel Wickham of Nottingham. You're in a lot of trouble and I suggest that you let me go back home right now. It was their 3rd day on the road and like previous times, she tried to get her captor to see reason. Not that she'd been successful in her other attempts. This man was convinced that she was Tamara and he was clearly bent on teaching her a lesson. My name is Byron and your story sounds as silly as a little child's. Abel is well known to me and I'm not aware that he has any nieces that look like you. Tamara, why don't you just stop with all the madness? Kate realised that she wasn't going to get anywhere with Byron unless she gave him proof that she wasn't Tamara. How well do you know my Aunt Tamara? It was an odd question, but if the girl wanted to play, then he would indulge her, as well as any man who's about to marry a woman knows his betrothed. Why do you ask? What colour are her eyes? Byron was lost for words. He stared at the woman in front of him, and then something suddenly hit him. Her eyes were silvery grey, while Tamara's were hazel. People may change a lot of things about them, but not their eyes. Your eyes are silvery grey. Yes, and Aunt Tamara's are hazel. So, unless some form of magic happened, I can't be my aunt. So you keep saying, he muttered, wondering how he could have missed that obvious difference. Perhaps he didn't know his fiancée as well as he thought after all. But it's true. I really am Kate Crammer, and my uncle will be upset that you abducted me. Observing her closely, he now saw the differences in the 2 women and felt foolish. How hadn't he noticed that, in the 3 days and nights they'd been on the road, and the way the woman wasn't screeching or throwing tantrums at every step of the way ought to have made him realise that he had abducted the wrong person. Byron felt slightly uncomfortable and actually fidgeted in his seat at Kate's intense gaze. How was he going to explain to Lord Abel that he'd mistaken his niece for Tamara? Anyone would understand that a mistake had been made, and perhaps they could brush it under the carpet and forget it ever happened. Still, it was going to take some explanation, and he hoped his peer wouldn't take it as an affront on his family. What a fine mess he was in! Please accept my sincere apologies, Lady Kathleen. You and your aunt look so much alike that you could easily pass for her. Can we go back home now? I don't want my uncle and new aunt to worry because of me, and yet they're supposed to be starting their married life. We've been on the road for almost 4 days, and I kept telling you that I'm not Tamara, yet you wouldn't listen to me. I'm sorry, Lady Kathleen. I let my anger blind me to what was so obvious. I'll ask my man to turn around so I can take you back home. Thank you, thank you. Byron asked Travis to stop at the next inn so they could get some refreshments before beginning the homeward journey. He was really remorseful for not having believed the poor young woman. Now he was faced with having to come up with a suitable explanation to Lord Abel for having abducted his niece. "I'll get you a room where you can rest for a while, and then we'll resume our journey." Thank you, Kate was really tired, and now that the strange adventure was nearly over, she just wanted to go back home. Byron ensured that Kate wouldn't be disturbed for at least 2 hours as she rested, then went in search of his senior footman. "What a waste of a journey, Travis." He rubbed down one of the horses that was in the large stable. 4 days of travelling to nowhere, and now I have to go back and explain to Lord Abel that I made a grave mistake." "Perhaps not, Your Grace." "What do you mean, Travis?" "This might be for the best. Remember, you've been on the road for close to 4 days with Lady Crammer without a proper chaperone. As your man, my presence doesn't count, for everyone expects that I'll always take your side in any problem. You can't just take the lady back home after all this, because no explanation will be enough to appease her relatives, and especially not Lord Abel Wickham. According to everyone who finds out about this journey, she's a ruined woman and can never get a respectable man to marry her." Byron frowned slightly. He hadn't thought about that, and he knew how news was bound to spread, and any hopes of Kathleen Crammer making a good match would be almost nihil. Besides that, it would be considered an affront to his peer for him to have taken his niece and return her so unceremoniously. Why hadn't he stopped to consider his actions before taking them? Grandma Mary would be really angry at him for having put a young girl in such a position, even though he behaved like a gentleman and taken good care of her. "What am I going to do, Travis?" "It's simple. Your grandmother wants you to marry so you can take over the duchy. Here's a young woman from a respectable family and of marriageable age whose future is now at stake because of your actions. The best thing you can do is offer for her hand and make her your wife. That will solve the problem of your needing a duchess, and also her honour will be preserved." "That means getting married right away," Byron said. "We're close to the border, and should anyone ask why the haste, you can always tell them that love overtook you and you didn't want to wait any longer. Besides, the young lady's family had already set themselves for the Duke's wedding, and you didn't want to remove anyone's focus from that." "A very lame story, Travis." "But what else do you have? Besides, the girl is easy on the eyes and seems pleasant enough, unlike—" The footman gave a discreet cough. Byron chose to ignore the unsaid implication, but his servant was right. Lady Tamara Wickham was a difficult woman to deal with. She was spoilt and selfish, but this young lady that he'd mistakenly abducted seemed rather mature. He wondered how old she was and whether she was 21 like Tamara. That was something he would have to find out before things went further. Chapter 4. An Unusual Proposal. Byron looked at Travis and nodded slowly. What he had suggested made a lot of sense, and it would be killing 2 birds with the same stone, gaining a wife while ensuring that Kate Crammer's honour was intact. But when all was said and done, it was up to the young lady to accept his proposal, and he hoped she wouldn't be difficult to convince. Kate opened her eyes and sighed in contentment. The rest had done her a lot of good, and now she was ready to return home and face whatever would be waiting. It wasn't her fault that Byron somebody, he hadn't even told her his last name, had abducted her. Would her uncle believe her and allow her back home? Or would he think of her as a wayward girl without honour and turn her out? That thought sobered her up, and she got out of bed, and straightened her crumpled clothes. The gown was all but ruined, and it had cost quite a tidy sum of money. Since she hadn't intended to be abducted on her uncle's wedding day, she didn't have an extra change of clothes and felt rather grimy. The sooner she got back home and enjoyed a long-scented bath, the better it would be for her. Byron was going to have to convince her uncle that nothing untoward had happened between them while she was under his care. Better still, she would appeal to her uncle's new wife for help. Lady Matilda had been good to her, and according to Sephora, always saw the good in people. That was who she would speak to before meeting with her uncle. There was a soft knock at the door. "Who is it?" "Just I, missy. Your young man is getting a little impatient and asked me to come and bring you downstairs." It was the innkeeper's wife. The nerve of the man. He had brought her here against her will, and now he wanted to hurry her up. Well, he could wait. Then she felt that she was being childish. The poor man had already apologised for his mistake, and he was going to have to face her relatives to explain why he'd abducted her. It couldn't be easy for him because her uncle's name was well known. What if Uncle Abel decided to take stern action against this man and have him put in prison? They were in a really tough spot here, and she quickly went down the rickety stairs after the plump woman who led her into the parlour, which was empty save for Byron. His back was turned towards the door as he stood in front of the small fireplace, and she got a moment to observe him. This man was dashing. That's what Sephora would have said, and it brought a smile to her face. "What's making you so happy? The fact that you're about to go back home?" That and thinking about what a friend might say about this situation that we're in. She stepped into the parlour and sat down at one of the lower tables. Byron came and took the opposite seat. "What might your friend say, if I may be so bold as to ask?" "That I'm in a fine mess," Kate twisted her lips. "My uncle won't believe that I didn't leave his house of my own free will. You see, I came a long way to search for him and got kidnapped before. It was my new aunt and my friend Sephora who rescued me and brought me to my uncle. To appear after a few days of disappearing and tell him that I was abducted again is stretching it too far. What if he thinks that I'm a person who can't be trusted and throws me out of his home?" Byron reached across the small table and took her hands. "Kathleen, this is all my fault and no one is to blame but me. That's the reason I'm willing to face your uncle and make things right. Once he hears what I have to say, I'm sure he won't be angry at you. You don't know who you're dealing with. My uncle has had it with relatives because one nearly caused his death a few days ago. Then there's my Aunt Tamara who won't sit still for a moment and is always getting into some kind of trouble or the other. Now I show up a few days ago and already go missing from the house. Uncle Abel won't take it too kindly and maybe you should just stay away from him." "Why?" "He'll probably have you thrown in jail after kicking me out of the house. I love him, but he is a duke and such people aren't to be taken lightly. Their word is law and I don't think you want to deal with that." Byron thought about telling Kate that he was also a duke, Abel's peer, but restrained himself. Perhaps her, not knowing that he was titled, might work in his favour. "I have another suggestion," he said hesitantly. "Which is?" She pulled her hands away. "You and I have been on the road without a proper chaperone for 4 days. Do you know how that will look and sound to the society?" Kate hadn't thought about that, and her heart sank. It seemed that she was in more trouble than she had thought. "This is all your fault," she glared at Byron. "If you hadn't let your anger rule over you, then none of this would have happened. My mama used to say that anger rests in the bosom of fools, and now I'm beginning to see the truth in that." Byron chose not to let the subtle insult sting. Instead, he took her hands again and looked her straight in the eye. "I'm a respectable man, and the 4 days we've been together ought to have showed you that. At the moment, I'm in a crisis because my grandmother wants me to marry, or else she'll withhold my inheritance from me and hand it over to someone who doesn't deserve it. That was the reason I was engaged to your aunt, but she let me down and said she can't marry me. Unfortunately, in my anger, I mistook you for her and brought you all this way. My intention was to reach the border and get married, then go and face whatever music was there." Kate didn't say a word. Kate, that's why I'm asking that you and I should go ahead and get married. Her head went up sharply. "That's the only way your honour will be protected, and I can get my inheritance." "You want a marriage of convenience?" Byron shook his head. "I'm hoping that our marriage can be a real one, and someday you and I may fall in love. I do believe that if we didn't kill each other in the confined space of the carriage these past few days, we can live together in a house. What do you say?" "Do I have any other choice?" "Yes, dear girl." He rubbed the back of her hand with his thumb. "You can always say no, and I'll take you right back home, meet your uncle and take whatever punishment he'll see fit to mete out. But I will make sure that he doesn't kick you out of his home." Kate thought for a moment, and then gave a brief nod. Perhaps she was mad, but marriage to this handsome and somewhat caring man didn't seem like such a bad idea. What's more, did she really have a better choice than this? "Should I take it that your nod means you'll be my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, even as she wondered what she was doing. In truth, she was halfway in love with Byron. He truly was a gentleman, for he hadn't taken advantage of her in the 4 days that they'd been travelling together. At each nightly stop, he would get her a room and ensure she was safe and undisturbed. She was sure he would make a good husband, and she would try to be the kind of wife that he needed. "Shall we leave then?" I asked Mrs. Laird to pack us something to eat on the way, because either way, we have a long journey ahead. She looked down at her creased dress. "I'm afraid I don't have anything suitable to wear." She was going to get married and at least hope for a better gown in which to do so. "That's my mistake, which I intend to rectify as soon as we get to our destination. There are shops that cater to hurried brides, and we'll find something suitable to wear, as well as other personal items that you need. Please forgive me for not considering your comforts, Kate." "Thank you." She stood up. "Shall we go now?" She needed to get away from Byron even briefly, because her heart was racing while her stomach seemed to have thousands of butterflies fluttering inside it. It was a simple wedding, and they had no ring, but Kate felt as married as can be. She was smiling at her husband, who seemed to look younger now that the tension of the past few days was gone. He promised her a ring as soon as they returned home, but she didn't really care. All that was ringing in her head was that she was married, and what would her uncle and aunt have to say? "We'll spend 2 days here so we can both rest. Poor Travis has never ridden so far, and so hard in his service for me. He's not a young man." Kate would have gone to the moon with Byron had he asked her, and the next 2 days were spent in isolated bliss at the best inn in Gretna Green. They were given everything Byron asked for, and she wondered how it was that he commanded such respect from people, yet he was a simple man. Their journey back home was spent in silence, as Kate finally came to her senses. It was like coming down from a floating cloud and landing hard on the ground. She was now a married woman, and they had to face their families with the news. Would Lady Mary Gladstone receive her as a granddaughter in law, or would there be trouble? Byron had told her about his grandmother, and she wondered at the kind of reception she would receive. What would her uncle say when they presented themselves to him as a couple? Don't worry about a thing, unlike their previous journey when Byron sat opposite her. This time, he held her in his arms. "I won't let anyone treat you with disdain because it's my duty as your husband to protect, pamper and provide for you. I just hope my uncle will see it the way you do." "He will, and I promise you that all will be well." Even as he spoke those words, Byron was worried about his grandmother. Lady Mary was a snob, that much he acknowledged, and she was a difficult one to please. However, the fact that Kate was Lord Abel's niece ought to win her over, at least he hoped so. This young lady was quite unlike any other he'd known, and he felt a strong sense of protectiveness over her. No one would cause her any trouble unless they wanted to deal with him. He was sure that with time, Kate's sweet disposition would win his grandmother over. Meanwhile, he also had to make Lord Abel understand that he meant no disrespect by first abducting and then ending up marrying his 17-year-old niece. When Kate had told him her age, he nearly didn't go through with the wedding. She seemed too young, but once again Travis had made him see sense. "Despite your young lady's age, she's mature, and that comes from having had a hard life. She wasn't brought up with a silver spoon in her mouth, and so knows how to relate to people well. Go ahead, marry the lass." "But she's young." "Women all over are getting married at 16, and she's actually a year older than the legal marriageable age. No one will fault you for falling in love with the lass, for she's comely." "I know that, but I'm nearly 10 years older than she is. With all my responsibilities, I don't want to take on a child too." "She's a bright girl, and knows that as a duke, you have certain obligations." Travis noticed the funny look on his master's face. "You haven't told your soon-to-be bride that you're a duke." "I didn't see the need to. Let her think that I'm just an ordinary wealthy man, and after the wedding I'll tell her." But there hadn't been time for him to tell Kate who he really was, and he hoped the shock of finding out that he was a duke wouldn't be too much for her. Chapter 5. Shocking Discovery. Kate stared at the large and imposing manor with both anger and awe. She turned accusing eyes to Byron. "Whose house is this? Why have you brought me here?" "My love," he took her hand, but she snatched it away. "Kate," his tone became a bit firmer, "this is your new home. I'm sorry I didn't inform you who I am or what I am, but we're married now. Come, the servants are waiting to meet you, as is my grandmother. Tell me everything before I enter that house." Byron sighed. "My name is Byron Gladstone, and I'm the Duke of Leicestershire. This is my home, now ours, because you're my wife." He took her hand and wouldn't let go. "I have to introduce you to my grandmother, then I'll show you to our bedchamber." But you said your name is Byron Logan, she stuttered stupidly. Why hadn't she thought things through before jumping into marriage with this man? Logan is my middle name and is also on my official documents, so I wasn't lying. It was done deliberately because you thought that I might have heard of your family. Her tone was accusing, but he chose to ignore that for the moment. That was a slight on my part, and for that, I'm really sorry. Please, let's not stand out here arguing, because the servants are watching, and we're keeping Grandma waiting. Kate wanted to run and hide. She thought that Byron was just an ordinary man who had plenty of money, but a title was the last thing she expected, and a duke at that. She allowed her husband to lead her into the manor and to a small drawing room. A tall, elderly woman rose from one of the seats. "Where have you been, Byron?" She held out her hands and Byron took them, taking turns to bring each to his lips. "My beautiful grandmother," he said. "I'm sorry that I've been away for the past few days, but I also come with good news." Let's have it, Lady Mary Gladstone practically ignored Kate. "What do you have to say after all that madness of cancelling your wedding? Imagine my shock when I found your note asking to be excused for a few days as you dealt with an urgent matter, and that the wedding should be called off. How do you think that made me look before my friends?" "I'm so sorry, Grandma. It wasn't my intention to embarrass you, but I have sorted the issue out now." "How? How?" "Grandma," Byron turned and pulled Kate to his side. Before he could introduce her, his grandmother demanded to know who she was. "This is clearly not Lady Tamara, even though they bear a striking resemblance. Byron, who is this woman, and what is she doing here?" "That's what I'm about to tell you, Grandma." Kate sensed that her husband was slightly nervous, and she squeezed his hand reassuringly. They needed each other in order to face this first hurdle. "This is Lady Kathleen Crammer, now Gladstone, niece to Lord Abel, the Duke of Nottingham. Kate, my love, this is my grandmother, Lady Mary Gladstone." Kate curtsied. "Your Grace." "I asked what she is doing here." Byron was taken aback by his grandmother's rudeness, and especially when he saw Kate go pale. "Kate is my wife, Grandmother. We got married 6 days ago, and I've come to introduce her to you before going on to her uncle's place to let him know that she's all right." "Is that right?" Lady Mary's voice was so hardened to their shock, she picked up her small fan and left them standing open-mouthed in the drawing room. "Your grandmother doesn't like me," Kate said sadly. "I wish I hadn't agreed to marry you." "My love, it's only the first day. My grandmother don't take too easily to people. She'll come around, you'll see." "I really hope so." Kate turned around and sought for a topic to ease the tension in the room. "You have a beautiful home, Byron." "Grandma has kept it this way for years. My mother died when I was only 3 and she brought me up. I love her and I pray that the two of you will become good friends." "That's my prayer too." "Come, you look exhausted. Let's rest for today and tomorrow. We'll go and visit your uncle so he will know that you're fine. But I'll make sure that I send one of the servants with a note for him so that when we arrive, it won't be too much of a shock for him." Though her uncle wasn't as dismissive as the Duchess had been, he nevertheless didn't give them an easy time. "So you abducted my niece and then ended up marrying her. What do you want me to say to that?" "We're here for your blessing, sir. I know that we're peers, but today I come to you as a nephew. In law, Your Grace." Byron bowed slightly to the man who was only about 2 years older than him. "Please accept my sincere apologies for my grave mistake." "Indeed it is a grave one, for Tamara and Kathleen here are related by blood. What will happen when my cousin returns home, only to find that her niece is married to the man she was engaged to until a few days ago? Your Grace, Lady Tamara rejected me, and that's what led to all this mess. I'm not blaming her, but I've fallen in love with your niece who is now my wife. I doubt that your cousin will have any trouble accepting that." Abel pursed his lips. Clearly, Byron didn't know his cousin Tamara that well, but he kept his thoughts to himself. "I suggest that you write to her and let her know about your marriage so that by the time she returns home, she's aware of what's going on. The last thing any of us wants to deal with is a shocked Tamara." "If I knew where to reach her, that's the first thing I would have done." "I'll give you the address, but please make sure that you write and let her know about your marriage. I don't want my relatives having bad blood between them because of this." While Byron was being questioned by her uncle, Kate was in Tilda's room. Sephora was present too, and the three ladies were happy to see each other again. "Your uncle has hardly slept a wink since you left, Kate. What happened to you?" Tilda hugged the younger woman. "You look both happy and sad at the same time." "That's because I'm feeling both, Aunt Tilda. I love Byron, even though we've only known each other a few days, and I'm so happy to be his wife. But his grandmother hasn't accepted me, and I know it's hurting him too. He really wants us to get along, but from the look of things..." She shrugged in defeat. "Your marriage was a shock, and when your uncle received the note from Lord Byron, it took a while for him to calm down. He kept insisting that you're just a child, and this man had taken advantage of you. I just hope he isn't giving your husband a hard time. Byron thought I was Aunt Tamara. That's why he abducted me. Once he realised his mistake, however, he wanted to bring me straight home, but the fact that we'd been without a proper chaperone made him propose marriage as the best solution." "Child, that's not the best reason for getting married. Are you sure that you'll be happy with Lord Byron?" "He says he's learning to love me." "What about you? Do you love him?" "Very much, Aunt Tilda." She had a dreamy expression on her face. Byron was really a wonderful man, and she felt lucky that he had chosen to marry her even though he didn't have to. Sephora made a sound that had the two of them turning to look at her. "Aunt Tilda, it's clearly a very romantic story, and you can see that the girl is deeply in love with her husband. They will be fine." "You may think that, Sephora, but what about Byron's grandmother? She's currently the Dowager Duchess and has been holding that position for a very long time. Do you think she will readily hand over the position to Kate? Besides, is Kate experienced enough to deal with matters of the duchy and how to be Duchess? The bottom line here is the fact that our Katie is married to Lord Byron and not his grandmother. If he's man enough, then he will defend and protect her until everyone learns to accept her. When it comes to learning all those things you say, I'm sure our dear Katie is a fast learner, and what she doesn't know, you'll teach her. After all, Aunt Tilda, aren't you also just learning what it is to be a duchess? Stop worrying so much. I know that the Duke will also help her." "What if he stops being there for her? You know that dukes often go to London to meet with the regent and sometimes spend a number of weeks there. Kate will go with her husband wherever he goes, isn't that right?" Kate shook her head. "What if something happens that I can't travel? What then?" "The best thing to do would be to come here while your husband is away. In that way, you'll avoid a lot of conflicts with your husband's grandmother. I don't think Uncle Abel will like that very much. Leave your uncle to me, but in reality, you have to find a way of getting along with the Dowager Duchess, or else you'll have many sleepless nights." Chapter 6. Troubled Times. "My darling, you're breaking my heart." Byron tried to comfort his distraught wife, but her tears continued to flow. "I'll be gone for only a few days, and nothing will happen to you. Your grandmother doesn't like me, and I've tried my best. You're the one who's been there to defend me all along, but now you're leaving me behind. Why can't I come with you?" Kate hated to sound whinny, but she was desperate. No amount of patience and good behaviour on her side had endeared her to the Dowager. If anything, the woman seemed to dislike her more with each passing day. "If our London townhouse was ready for occupation, I would gladly take you with me. As it is, I'm going to have to put up at the Regent's Court, and that can be rather uncomfortable since there are so many people ever present. Our house is being renovated and is in bad shape. My darling, please just calm down. I'll be back before you know it." "We could stay at a hotel," she suggested, clasping at what she felt was the last straw. "That's true, but the nature of my business with the Regent Prince is such that our meetings are likely to go on until very late. That's the reason rooms are provided for guests who have to be there until late. What's more, you'll be bored alone during the day when I can't be with you. My darling, this is only a short separation, and it's also hurting me to have to leave you behind. Please understand that." Kate didn't want to come off as a clingy and whinny wife, but she dreaded the days ahead when her husband wouldn't be there to stand up for her against his grandmother. Lady Mary found fault with everything she did, and she'd stopped trying to please her at her husband's urging. "Would you like to go and spend a few days with your aunt and uncle until I return? This is supposed to be my home, and if I'm not happy here, then where else should I go? I don't want your grandmother to find one more reason to think that I'm not a suitable wife for you," Kate cried out. "What am I going to do without you, Byron?" He reached out and pulled her into his arms, his strong arms holding her close. My love, please don't cry. If this meeting with my regent prince wasn't important, I wouldn't go. We'll be together very soon. I promise you that. He looked really agitated, and she didn't want to add to his stress, so she decided that she would be strong, at least this one. I'll be all right. She cleared her throat and gave him a watery smile. Please, just promise me that you'll be safe and come back to me soon. His response was to give her a deep kiss. I have so much to look forward to, and you can be sure that as soon as my business with the regent is wound up, I won't spend another night in London. For the first 2 days that Byron was gone, Kate managed to stay out of the dowager's path. She spent a lot of time in her bedchamber wishing she could leave and visit her uncle, but she didn't want anyone saying that she was a weak woman. Staying at the manor would prove to Byron's grandmother that she had come to stay and wasn't a fleeting bird as she'd called her on that first day they'd met. Lady Mary refused to acknowledge her as Lord Abel Wickham's niece, saying everyone knew that he had no sisters living or dead. Much as Byron had tried to convince his grandmother that it was true, she still called Kate a gold digger. My grandson will soon come to his senses, and then we'll see where you'll end up. Grandma, I'm standing right here, and it's disrespectful to speak to my wife, the Duchess, like that in front of me. Lady Mary had merely snorted and left the room. Going downstairs to face her was proving quite a challenge, and Kate was glad her personal maid, Priscilla, saw to her meals and other personal needs. If need be, she didn't have to leave her bedchamber for several days. There was a soft knock and she bid the person enter. It was Gregory, the butler. My lady, the Dowager Duchess, requests your company in the drawing room at once. Yes, Gregory, thank you. Heart pounding, Kate made her way to answer the summons, but when she entered the drawing room and found her aunt seated with the Duchess, she knew there was going to be trouble. This woman tried to harm me. Tamara was weeping. She claims to be related to us, but we don't know her. Abel was just sorry for her and took her in, yet this is how she repays me. Kate stood with her head bowed, hands clasped in front of her. Won't you say anything? I don't know what you want me to say, Your Grace. You're a usurper, is what you are, Kathleen Crammer. You thought that by pretending to be Lady Tamara, you could take her betrothed away and have a place in this house. I'm sorry to inform you that your plans have all failed. Still, Kate was silent. You have 2 choices. One is that you leave this manor and never return again, but if you refuse, I'll have you arrested and charged for impersonating a noblewoman. You've caused this poor lady so much stress. Hurry up and get out of my sight, for you make me sick just seeing you standing there, pretending to be all innocent, and yet you're a criminal. Kate's eyes were filled with tears as she rushed out of the drawing room. Why had Byron left her here? Now her aunt was here, and only God knows what lies she was feeding the dowager. Any hopes of winning her over were now gone, and she had to find another way of fighting for her marriage and her home. She wouldn't let Tamara's lies cause her to abandon her home. She had to be strong for Byron and prayed that he would return as quickly as he'd promised. Chapter 7. Unexpected Rescue. There was only so much that she could take, and Kate knew that if she didn't leave the manor, her head would explode. She tried to resist all attempts by the Duchess and Tamara to get her out of the house because she wanted Byron to respect her. If she went running to her uncle's place, he might think that she was still very immature and take his grandmother's advice of putting her away and getting another wife. She loved her husband, and for his sake she was ready to put up with so much, but everyone has their limits, and Kate reached hers a few days later. Tamara had taken up residence at the manor and behaved as though she was the next Duchess. Even the servants had to obey her, or they would be in trouble. Lady Mary seemed to have left the running of the house to her, and when Kate rang the bell for Priscilla, the girl didn't come. She needed to take a bath and wanted some water brought up to her, so she rang the bell again. Still no sign of Priscilla. Finally, she decided to go down to the kitchen to find out what was going on. "Where's Priscilla?" she asked the scullery maid. "I've been ringing my bell for her to attend me, but she didn't come." "That's because I sent her on another important errand." The dowager entered the kitchen. "If you need anything done, you can as well do it yourself. The servants are here to minister to members of the family and not fellow servants." Kate was thoroughly humiliated, especially when she saw how the servants were looking at her. To their credit, they sympathized with her, but the shame of being made to feel like a nobody in their presence was too much for her. Without a further word, she went up to her bedchamber and packed a small valise. If Byron still wanted to remain married to her, he was going to have to accept that his grandmother would never approve of her and make provision for a new home for them. This was, after all, the dowager's home, and she had every right to treat anyone the way she pleased, including her grandson's wife. There was no one in the hallway when she left, and as she closed the main door behind her, the tears started falling. As she started walking down the driveway, she heard a sound behind her and turned. It was the butcher who'd just delivered supplies for the house, and she asked him to convey her to the nearest stage so she could take the coach to Nottingham. Kate was dozing off when the stagecoach lurched and she was thrown from her side, landing on a buxom lady. "I'm sorry, Mum." "Not your fault, lassie." The woman's teeth were yellow and her mouth smelled of stale beer. These good-for-nothing drivers. The coach lurched again and then came to a sudden stop. Mercifully, it wasn't packed, as was the norm, and everyone stepped out of the coach. Kate saw an overturned coach ahead of them and frowned. It looked very familiar, but she was afraid of getting too close without knowing what was going on. "What happened?" she asked the driver of the coach on which she was travelling. "Seems like a nasty accident." He pointed at two bodies on the side of the road. "Those men weren't so lucky." "That carriage looks very familiar," she said. "Bears the Gladstone crest," the coach driver said. "My man went over to check and said it is the Duke's personal carriage." His face was turned away and he failed to see that Kate had gone white upon his announcement. "I've only seen those two, and no one else seems to have been in it." But Kate was sure Byron had been in the carriage, for it was the same one that had conveyed him to London a few days before. The other three carriages were parked at the estate, and to her knowledge, no one was currently using them. "Are you sure there was no one else in there?" she asked the driver again. He was getting irritated at the delay and brushed her off. Some villagers had come to help clear the road so other vehicles could pass, but Kate kept looking around to see if she could find her husband. According to those who'd witnessed the accident, the carriage came flying from nowhere, and the driver seemed to be having a difficult time controlling the horses. Suddenly, one of the horses reared up and then crashed onto its side, and the other one fell on top of it. The carriage also crashed and the two men were thrown clear. When the villagers checked, the two men were already dead with broken necks, but no one had seen a third. "My husband was in that carriage," she pleaded with the coach driver. "Please help me look for him. He could be lying in the bushes, bleeding." "I doubt that anyone could have survived that kind of a crash, Missy. Just accept that your husband is dead." "If he is, then, doesn't he deserve a good burial on his family estate?" She was weeping openly. "My husband is Lord Byron Gladstone, the Duke of Leicestershire. Surely you people know him," she appealed to the bystanders. Her words spurred the people to action, and before long, a cry came from a thicket. "I see something!" The man cried out and everyone rushed over. Indeed, it was Lord Byron, and he had a nasty gash on the side of his head, which was bleeding profusely. "Is he dead?" Kate asked fearfully, her heart in her mouth. "No, my lady, the coach driver had become all helpful. Shall we take him home?" "No, sir. I'm on my way to Nottingham, and if you could please take us there, my family will take good care of my husband for me." Chapter 8. Restful Moments. "My love," Kate sobbed as she held Byron's head on her lap. "Please open your eyes. Don't die and leave me alone in this world. How am I supposed to live without you? I need you so much. Please wake up, Byron." But her husband's eyes remained shut, and she willed the coach to hurry and get them to her uncle's house. The other passengers had agreed to wait by the side of the road for the coach to return, and for that, Kate was most grateful. It was a 2-hour journey, but seemed like a lifetime to her, and she kept praying that Byron wouldn't die before she got help. When the large gates of her uncle's estate came into view, she nearly cried out in joy. She was shouting as the coach pulled up to the front door, and her cries attracted some servant. Once the coach pulled up outside the manor, servants came running to see what the matter was. When they recognised her and her husband, they quickly carried Byron up to the room that had been hers while she lived with her uncle. "What happened to your husband?" Her uncle came in some time later, just as Tilda finished cleaning and then bandaging the wound. The sight of so much blood in the small basin made Kate feel faint. But at least Byron was breathing, which was quite reassuring. "Katie, what happened?" Seeing how distraught she was, he held out his arms and she wasted no time running to him. Uncle Abel, for a moment Kate couldn't speak and was glad of her uncle's strong arms around her. "Calm down, child. Don't distress yourself so much. Gerald has sent someone to bring the doctor, and I've released the coach to return to its normal duties. You'll be all right now. Just try and calm down. Your husband will be all right." The doctor, when he came, said Byron would be all right, but would need to rest completely for a while. No stress and strain when he wakes up. Just don't disturb him at all. "Yes, doctor." No matter how much Tilda tried to get Kate to rest, the latter refused. "You'll make yourself ill if you don't get enough rest. You look completely drained and fatigued." "I can't bear to be away from Byron for a single moment, Auntie," Kate said hoarsely. She was feeling really ill but didn't want to mention that to her aunt. Everyone was worried about Byron as it was, and she didn't want to cause them any further distress. Why won't he wake up? A full day had passed since they arrived at her uncle's place, but her husband still hadn't regained consciousness. Tilda was also worried, but she could see how devastated Kate was and didn't want another patient on her hands. "He'll be all right. You heard what the doctor said, but you also need to rest. I'm now beginning to worry about you because of the way you are. Please, could you send someone to bring Lady Mary here? What if Byron doesn't ever wake up again?" She put her face in her hands and wept. "His grandmother will blame me for this also." Tilda frowned slightly. "Kate, you really haven't told me the events that led to your bringing your husband here, instead of taking him home when he got injured." Kate nodded. "I'm sorry, Aunt Tilda. It's been a really trying time for me at home and I had to leave." "Of your own free will, or did someone drive you out of your husband's home?" "Aunt Tamara showed up there a few days ago, and she told Lady Mary that I had tried to harm her so as to take her place in Byron's life. Lady Mary wouldn't listen to anything that I tried to say, and they made me feel so unwelcome that I left. It was on the way here that I saw the Gladstone carriage which had overturned. The 2 footmen were dead. I'm sorry for your loss. Lord Byron will be sad to learn that his servants perished on the road while taking him back home. I don't think they're Byron's regular servants. He went to London with Travis and Malcolm, but it wasn't them lying dead by the side of the road. Those 2 men I saw were total strangers, but I was sure that my husband was in the coach with them. When our coach driver stopped, I begged him to help me find Byron. We searched the surrounding area and found Byron lying in a thicket. I didn't want to take him home because Lady Mary wouldn't have let me take care of my husband. She gave me the choice to leave her home or else be arrested for impersonating a noble woman." "You're no impersonator and are a noblewoman, Kate." Tilda's tone was indignant. "I'll let your uncle know what that woman did to you. How dare she send you out of your own home?" "Aunt Tilda, please let it be. I don't want to cause any bad blood between Uncle Abel and my husband's family. This has got to stop. I won't have anyone harassing you and making your life difficult." "Please," Kate begged, and Tilda agreed to hold her peace. But only for the moment, she fumed. "As for that Tamara girl, I don't want to see her here again. This has been her home. You can't stop her from coming here. This is my home now, and I have the right to choose who stays and who leaves. You're under your uncle's protection now, and I dare anyone to come here and create any problems for you." In the pain of the past few days, Kate actually smiled at her aunt's words. She had family who were willing to defend her, and for that she was glad. But she also prayed that her arrival at her uncle's home wouldn't strain the relations between hers and Byron's family. Chapter 9. Mixed Feelings. When Byron opened his eyes, his hand immediately went to his head, which felt heavy. It was bandaged, and for a few minutes he wondered what had happened. Then his memory returned, and he tried to sit up. "Don't be in such haste to rise up, boy." His grandmother came and stood over him. "How do you feel now?" "Where's Kate?" "Your wife isn't here." "Go get me Kate," Byron said in a louder voice. "Kate!" he called out. "Will you be quiet? It's nearly midnight, and everyone had gone to bed. Do you want to wake the whole household?" she hissed. "Get me Kate," Byron insisted stubbornly. "Just go and bring my wife to me, Grandma." The door opened and Tilda entered the room. "My lord, you're awake." Aunt Tilda, I want Kate. Please calm down. You've been ill for a few days and... Kate, Byron shouted once again, and his grandmother shook her head. This one is so stubborn. He won't stop demanding to see his wife. It's all right, Your Grace. Tilda touched Byron's arm and spoke to him as one would a stubborn child. I'm going to bring Kate to you right now, but you have to promise that you'll be calm. Her eyes seemed to be conveying a message which he didn't immediately comprehend. But he wanted to see his beloved, have her by his side, so she could see that he was all right. Kate must be really worried about him if she had to bring him to her uncle's house, for he could see that this wasn't his home. Okay, he turned his face to the wall and refused to speak to his grandmother. He knew that his wife's absence had to do with her, and he wasn't in a very good mood right now. The door opened after a few minutes, and he was surprised to see 2 male servants bringing in a small cot, which they placed next to his bed. "What's going on?" he asked, but no one answered him. One of the servants returned with Kate in his arms and placed her on the cot. Her face was deathly pale, and she seemed to be unconscious. "What did you do to my wife, Grandma? I'll never forgive you if you harmed my darling in any way." "Your Grace," Tilda was back in the room. "This isn't anyone's fault. When you were ill, Kate wouldn't let anyone else nurse you, and yesterday she collapsed. We called the doctor and he said it's all due to strain and fatigue." She smiled. "And something else." "What is it, Aunt Tilda?" "Your wife is with child and the strain of taking care of you, plus her changing body was too much for her. But she'll be all right." "Are you sure?" Byron forgot all about his aches and pains. He just wanted to be close to his wife. "Will my Kate be all right?" "Yes, she will." Once he was sure that Kate was sleeping peacefully and would be all right, Byron calmed down enough to tell Lord Abel and his Duchess what had happened to him. He'd refused to speak to his grandmother, even though he knew that she was somewhere in the large manor. "I had just wound up my business with the regent when Gregory, my butler, sent me word that my wife was really having a rough time because of my grandmother and Tamara. Apparently, your cousin showed up at my home and claimed that Kate had tried to do her harm so she could usurp her. My grandmother listened to her and they made life so difficult for Kate." His eyes went to the sleeping woman. "I wasn't there to defend my darling from whatever she was undergoing, and this is all my fault." "Byron, none of this is anyone's fault. Just calm down and tell us how you came to be injured," Tilda said softly. "The meeting ended quite late, and in my haste to get home, I didn't realize that the men driving me weren't my servants. When I demanded to know what they wanted with me, they became hostile and I had to fight for my life. That's when the carriage lost control, and the next thing I knew, I woke up, here, in this bed. Your wife was coming home to us on a stagecoach when they met your overturned carriage on the way. She insisted that you were probably in it, and had she not done so, those rescuers would have left you out there in the bushes. If you'd lost more blood, you would be dead now. I owe this lovely woman my life in so many ways. How will I ever repay her?" "By loving, protecting and supporting her," this Lord Abel said with his eyes resting tenderly on his own wife. "A wife is a treasure, Byron. It's up to you to make sure that you protect her, and make sure that you protect her, and make sure that no one causes her any unnecessary grief. If you can't live with my niece, please just let me have her back. I never knew my sister, her mother, and finding Kate was a miracle. I'm not ready to lose her. Sir, I promise on my honour and with my life that no one shall ever cause my beloved any grief, not unless they kill me first. As for your cousin Tamara, I have one request. Please make sure that she never crosses my path, or I won't be responsible for what happens to her." "Have no fear of that. Your grandmother already dealt with her with a very firm hand, and I doubt that she will want to cross her." "Grandma," Byron couldn't believe it. The woman had showed a preference for Tamara over his wife. "Are we speaking about the same woman who wouldn't accept Kate as my wife? Why is she even here?" "As soon as Kate brought you here, she asked us to bring your grandmother, and Tamara tagged along." "Aunt Tilda, was that really necessary?" "Kate thought so, and that was why we asked Lady Mary to come. My husband had to go and bring her here himself because he was sure she wouldn't come otherwise." Byron turned to Abel. "I sincerely apologise for all the inconvenience my family has caused you." "Think nothing of it. We're just glad that you're all right." "What were you saying about Grandma sending Tamara away? He once again turned to Tilda, but it was Abel who answered him. When Kate fell ill, your grandmother asked Tamara to take over caring for you, and let's just say, she did a terrible job. She didn't care for you at all, and it was the servants who did everything. Your grandmother was greatly incensed and sent her packing. I've made arrangements for her to go to some of our relatives in the north, and she'll stay there until we find her a husband. I hope she never shows her face anywhere around me or my wife. She knows the repercussions of disobeying me. What you have to concentrate on now is getting better so you can be there to help your wife through the next few months. You can count on me for that, sir. Chapter 10. To have and to hold forever. Kate felt her husband's presence long before she even opened her eyes. Byron, she whispered as his face slowly came into focus. Where am I? He kissed her palms and she put a hand to his cheek. You're alive and well, she whispered huskily. Oh, Byron, I was so scared when I thought I had lost you forever. You can't get rid of me that easily, he said with a twinkle in his eyes. Yes, I'm alive and I'm told that it's all because of you. I only did what anyone else would have done in the circumstances. Dear wife, I beg to differ. He smiled at her so tenderly that she blushed. Yes, that's the colour that your face should be, he said. My beautiful wife, he kissed her full on the lips, and she protested. I haven't cleaned up in a while. That's nothing in comparison with having you awake again, my sweet. I'm so happy to see you, she struggled to sit up. I was so worried when you wouldn't wake up, her eyes filled with tears. If those are tears of joy that we're both alive and well, as is our little one, he put a hand on her stomach, then let them fall. But if you're crying out of sadness as your husband and Duke, I strictly forbid it. Oh, Byron, I was so scared. I thought I'd lost you. God spared my life, my darling, so I can be with you and our baby. This grace that has been bestowed on me is great, and I won't ever take the time we have together for granted. I know that in the past few days of our marriage, I've told you that I love you. I didn't know how much until I thought I was going to lose you and the baby. Seeing you here with me, she shuddered, and Byron held her close. When we came across the overturned carriage, everyone believed the worst. Wait, what were you doing on the road and where were you going? Byron. I need to hear everything. No more secrets between us ever. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Now speak. Kate didn't want to be a tattletale, but she knew that her husband wouldn't let her be until she'd told him what he wanted to hear. She took a deep breath. After you left, Aunt Tamara came to our house and she told Lady Mary that I had usurped her. Go on, go on. Lady Mary believed her and asked me to leave the house. Asked or commanded. It doesn't matter, Byron, but I decided that I didn't want to continue being the reason why your grandmother wasn't happy, so I left the house and boarded the coach. The Gladstone home has 4 carriages and only one was in use. Did nobody think to convey you to your destination? Darling, Kate touched his arm lightly. If I had taken one of the family carriages, then I would never have come across the accident. I might not have found you in good time. Byron nodded, but he was still angry. That makes sense. Go on. We came across the overturned carriage and 2 of the men were dead. When I looked at their faces, I didn't recognise either of them, and that's what really worried me. You left home with Malcolm and Travis and I. Doubt that you would have left them behind on purpose. Those 2 criminals surprised and overpowered them, binding them and leaving them in the Regent's stables. Luckily, I just got news this morning that both men are fine. The Regent has ordered an investigation to find out who was behind the plot to harm me. I won't ever let you out of my sight again, Kate said fiercely, and her husband chuckled. You won't ever have to let me out of your sight again, because where I go, you will also be there. No one is ever going to come between us to ruin our marriage and break our love. But Tamara still wants you. Does she now? I understand that Grandma sent her packing and your uncle has her going up north for the longest time. We shall not have any trouble from that person, he sighed. It's my grandmother that has me worried. The door opened and they both turned to see who it was. You don't ever have to worry about me, Lady Mary stepped into the room, tears in her eyes. I've been so wrong from the beginning. To me, status and titles were all that mattered, and I was blinded by my foolishness. She came up to the bed. Please forgive me, my children. I have learnt a bitter lesson and know that no one can interfere in true love. Grandma. Byron, please let me speak. I was outside listening in on your conversation, and it suddenly hit me that I could have lost you because of my foolish pride. This young lady didn't give up on the search for you, and now I know that she is the very essence of nobility and a true Gladstone bride. Lady Mary. Child, will you find it in your heart to call me Grandma like your husband does? I'd like that very much. Epilogue. Never had two people seen such a doting grandmother as did the Duke of Leicestershire and his beautiful Duchess. Lady Mary seemed to be making up for lost time, and she fussed over both of them so much that they begged her to stop. Once it was established that they were well enough to travel, the Dowager Duchess, Lady Mary Gladstone, made arrangements for the most comfortable carriage they owned to come and convey them home. It was a wonderful homecoming for everyone, as the Dowager finally introduced the Duchess and gave her the rightful place on the estate. As for the Duke and his Duchess, they were so lost in each other's arms and presents that most of the welcoming ceremony was over before they paid anyone any attention. I never carried you over the threshold the first time I brought you home, my lord, the Duke said to his blushing bride. Byron, people are looking at us. Let them view to their heart's contentment, because they need to understand that their master is in love with his wife. He just hopes that his Duchess loves him too. More than you'll ever know, she said dreamily, and gave herself up to be lifted in his strong arms and carried into their home as the servants cheered and whistled. Lady Mary Gladstone had a satisfied look on her face in all this.
The end. Thank you for listening. Here at PureRead, we aim to serve you, our dear readers and listeners, with good, clean Christian stories. You can be assured that any PureRead book you pick up will not only be hugely enjoyable but free of any objectionable content. We are deeply thankful to you for choosing our books. Your support means that we can continue to provide stories like the one you have just listened to. Please like and subscribe to our channel. That way you'll be the first to hear when new stories arrive for your enjoyment. To browse our range of clean and wholesome titles, go to pureread.com. God bless you and thank you again for listening.